different from chattel slavery, except that it's temporary. And that was such a popular idea that it was a position of the Republican Party that Abraham Lincoln espoused it. And that makes sense. I mean, there's nothing holy about wage labor. You are renting yourself, which is not very different from being a slave.
That was Noam Chomsky you heard speak. He is a popular figure in American liberalism that equated slavery and wage labor to be the same under capitalism. So I wanted to know, what is capitalism? And I did what most people our generation does in our current time, is Google that. And actually I looked at pictures to see the how people depict capitalism. Some of the images were pro-capitalism and some were anti-capitalism, and I wanted to share both sides to you so you can see for yourself and see if you agree or disagree with each image. The first one is showing a black man and a white man being exploited under capitalism. So they're going to be working for the capitalist factory to be taken advantage, to be exploited for profit. And this image is actually important that they're both black and white, is to show that capitalism does not care about your skin color. It will exploit you no matter what you look like. Then we have this picture of Milton Friedman. If you've never heard of him, he's a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he believed that capitalism was the best thing since sliced bread. He would argue maybe that without capitalism, we would never have sliced bread. And he thought that capitalism was a beacon of freedom and they were interconnected. So that's his view. He had a very positive view of capitalism, and he also believed in less taxes. No matter what, just less taxes overall. Then we have this image here that essentially speaks on the American colonies that rely on slave labor. And he mentioned that essentially it's still the same system where capitalists are exploiting people for max profit, and that this is deregulation by Republicans, which is the American Conservative Party, socially and economically. But we have this graph, which is what a lot of pro-capitalists mention, is the growth, the GDP growth of each country. As you can see, China actually in the 1990s was extremely poor, and now it's one of the wealthiest nations on the planet because it adopted capitalist principles. Which, funny enough, Adam Smith and Wealth of Nations mentioned that China would stay poor because it was poor for 1,000 years. China, due to capitalist principles, has now become one of the wealthiest nations ever in history. And we have this common view of capitalism where the elite is crushing the working class for profit. It's self-explanatory. And money is the biggest symbol of capitalism. To people that are pro-capitalism, money is a good thing. Money shows that you've provided value to somebody in exchange. They give you money. It's a flow. It's blood of an economy. And to people that are anti-capitalism, they see money as something bloody, something that somebody died, somebody got exploited. And since the Western world is strongly influenced by Christianity, there is a famous phrase that is used that the love of money is the root of all evil, to show that money is not good, or the accumulation of wealth is not good. This was actually drawn during Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. And this image shows the inequality created by capitalists owning all the wealth of the nation and the workers who own nearly nothing. That's why the U.S. is going to catapult into the water. It's gonna fail. And socialist, which is what Bernie Sanders is what's gonna save America from falling. Now, after reading these things and seeing these images and reading about capitalism and reading about socialism and communism, I wanted to know, is capitalism pro-slavery? Is that depiction correct? Is Noam Chomsky correct in saying that wage labor is the same thing as slavery under capitalism? So before getting started to figure out the answer to that question, we have to be on the same page as what each word means. So we have to define what capitalism is. Capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. So think of it this way: you are under capitalism, somebody owns a factory that creates pencils. It costs them $1 to create the pencil, including paying their laborer, and they sell the pencil for $2, and they keep the $1 profit for each pencil they sell. They don't share with the laborers; they just keep it. Slavery is the practice or institution of holding people as chattel, involuntarily, and under threat of violence. So a slave is somebody that gets beaten to work, or threatened to get killed to work. Now, if that is something you could probably have seen in any of the slave movies, anything, you would have seen it. And an employee is a person employed for wages or salary, especially at non-executive level. So that's somebody who is a wage laborer, which Noam Chomsky says they're basically the same thing, which based on this definition, they're definitely not. One is getting paid for something, the other one is getting beaten and potentially killed for not doing something. Very different motivations. Now, for this example, to figure out capitalism and slavery, we have to assume that you're a lazy, greedy capitalist who doesn't really care about anybody. All you care about is earning money and not having to work. So you have two options. You have employees, which is aka a paid laborer, or you have slaves, aka free labor. So which one would actually be better for your business? So you started with employees, and you started with a burger joint. It's a very simple business. All you do is sell one type of burger to your customers. Your business model is very simple. Each burger you sell costs you $50 to manufacture. That includes everything from taxes, rent, anything that, it's just to make it simple, anything that costs you to make that burger. And you sell your burger for $2. So you figured out that an employee can make 134 burgers in 8 hours worth of work, which means in a day, you're able to have a revenue of $268. Each day you have to spend about $67 for making the burgers, like all the material cost. And since you're paying for the labor, minimum wage, because minimum wage is very high right now, for this example, it's costing you $10 an hour. That means you end up paying $80 to the laborer to work. At the end of the day, you end up profiting $121 a day from your laborer's work, which is fantastic. And you earn about $2,020 a month, and you don't even have to work. You get to stay at home, chill, and rack in from the profits, which is really good. You like that. Your employee's life is a little different. They have to work 40 hours a week. They're not chilling at home, and they actually net less money than you are. You only pay them $1,600 a month. And they have to pay for rent, they have to pay for transportation, they have to pay for food, they have to pay for insurance, they have to pay for healthcare, they have to pay retirement. So retirement, they actually read in Richest Man in Babylon to always put 10% away. So that's what they decided to do. So they pay for retirement, and then miscellaneous. So that's $40. That's if they want to go to a restaurant or they want to go to a movie, and that's what they do. And at the end of the month, they're netting $0. Meanwhile, you are a smart capitalist. You're a smart person. So you spend as much as your employee. You don't spend too much money. Since you earn a profit from the labor, at the end of the month, you actually have an extra $420 than them, which is really good. And you even have to work. So they're working more than you, and they're earning less money than you. That's fantastic. You don't really care about them. It's their thing. Then you hear that you can buy slaves for free labor. That sounds enticing. Luckily for you, your rich dad gives you a slave for free. So obviously, you fire your old employee and put your slave to work. First day with your slave making burgers, your slave made a total of 5 burgers and ate them all. So instead of the $121 in profit that you earned yesterday when you had an employee, you ended the day with negative $2.50 from the burgers your slave ate. You call your dad to complain. He tells you that since your slave doesn't want to work for you, you have to beat him to work. Since you're a lazy capitalist, you hire somebody to beat your slave for you. Your manager requires a higher wage, so now you have to pay more than minimum wage. These are your new expenses, so now you have to pay your manager $15 an hour. You have to pay rent for your slave. Let's say you give them the worst room possible, the worst housing, So you end up paying only $200 for rent. You have to pay food, and you give them minimal amount of food so they can barely survive and work. So that that costs you $45, and your slave makes less burgers because they don't want to help you. They're doing the bare minimum so that you don't beat them to death. So they're only making 100 burgers. So your revenue actually decreases. So at the end of the month, your net profit is actually only $345. That means you have quote unquote free labor, and free labor is costing you more money, and you have more to manage because now you have two employees instead of just one. And I wanted to figure out, like, why is that? Did I think of this example correctly? Is it too simplistic? So I opened up Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, who's considered the father of capitalism. And an important caveat that's important is he didn't create capitalism. He wrote about it. He was one of the first writers and probably the most influential writer, because we're still studying him. I'm still studying his book. I've read it multiple of times, and I'm still studying because a lot of it I don't fully grasp. And these are what he mentioned. So in book 1, chapter 9, he mentioned slavery twice. The first part, he says, the wear and tear of a slave is the expense of his master. That of a free servant is in reality as much as the expense of his master as that of the former. Though the wear and tear of a free servant be equally at the expense of his master, it generally costs him much less than that of a slave. So it costs a capitalist less money to hire somebody, a servant, like a free man, to work for him. It costs him less money. And he continues to say that from the experience of all ages and nations, the work done by freemen comes cheaper in the end than that performed by slaves. It is found to be so even when the wages of common labor are very expensive. So I wrote hard accidentally. I don't know how I did that. He essentially mentions that throughout history, no matter what economic system people went through, because he's talking about under monarchies, under feudalism, under basic, under any economic system, having a slave has always been more expensive than paying somebody to labor. Then he continues in Wealth of Nations, which earlier I mentioned about the retirement fund. Here it says, in book 1, chapter 1, and a workman, even of the lowest and poorest order, if he is frugal and industrious, may enjoy a greater share of the necessities and conveniences of life than it is possible for any savage to acquire. So because of capitalism, it allows the poorest person who works, as long as they work and they're frugal with the money, that's an important part. Frugal and industrious means somebody who works. They're able to enjoy way more of life, material goods, and also food. That's the first thing. And an important thing that's super important too, pertaining to the retirement, is by what a frugal man annually saves, he not only affords maintenance to an additional number of productive hands for that of the ensuing year, but like the founder of a public warehouse, he establishes as if it were a perpetual fund to the maintenance of equal number in all times to come. That means by saving capital, the laborer is able to live longer. He's able to hire other people to work for him, and he's able to use that money to have things. He's able to use that money to hire people or to buy goods that he needs, goods and services that he needs, which is not possible for a slave, because under these socialist ideas, you are only one or the other. You're either part of the elite owner class or you're not an owner. You have no capital. And that is not true. Under capitalism, a worker who is frugal is able to accumulate capital and use that capital to earn more capital. It's not just to the initial capitalist. More people can have capital. So no, capitalism is not pro-slavery. The lazy, greedy capitalist loses money by having slaves. The worker suffers for their entire lives under slavery because they're suffering, they can never retire. The economy suffers too. The only person that benefits with slavery under capitalism is the person that enjoys beating somebody into submission. That's the only person that profits because they can do that for money. That's the only person who wins under that. If you think about it, the person who owns the slave hates them. So now they actually have to be scared that the slave is going to kill them. So they're earning less money and they're putting their life in jeopardy by having people that hate them around them. I don't see why this idea that capitalism is pro-slavery. Now, why did I write this video? The biggest reason why is a lot of socialist and communist think tanks on the internet try to equate capitalism with slavery when capitalism is in fact anti-slavery. And it's demeaning to all the previous and current victims of slavery to say that being paid for your work is the same as getting beaten and worked to literal death. And lastly, I am a capitalist and pro-capitalism. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts and if you agree or disagree with my assessment.